My name's Bridget Clay, and today I'm going to be talking about some frameworks and principles to consider around teacher professional learning. I know that you heard from Pete Dudley yesterday, who was talking about some models and processes that teachers can collaborate to develop their professional learning. And I'm looking particularly at how you kind of lead and consider the frameworks around that. And lots of what I'll be talking about today, or all of what I'll be talking about today, comes from this book that I co-wrote with David Weston. And I have to confess, it's largely based on our work in schools in the UK and some research from other English-speaking countries. So after I've spoken, there'll be a chance for you to consider some questions and discuss your contexts. And I'm really keen to hear how some of this might apply to you. So the first thing to say is that learning something new is really difficult. And we have, all of us as humans, have innate biases working against us, which encourage us to stick to what we know and reject anything that's unfamiliar or potentially challenging or new. So confirmation bias means that everybody in this room will leave this talk now with a slightly different version of what's been said, because you'll all hear something slightly different depending on your preconceptions and current knowledge. The things that we invest time and energy in, the IKEA effect, are the things that we then value more and we want to stick to more. And that makes learning something new really difficult, because if we've spent lots of time and energy getting good at something and then we find there might be a better way or a different way, that's really challenging, and all of us are inclined to kind of resist that. We believe who we like and we don't believe who we don't like. So people who we see as peers, people who we recognise are in similar contexts to us, we're more readily likely to take on board their ideas. And reading through this list, you might be thinking of some particular examples of this, but we all have this. This is what makes us human, and this is how we learn. So by definition, all of these different biases are working against us and stopping us from learning new things, sticking to what we already know. But today I want to talk about 4 areas that can help overcome that challenge. But I think it's important to start with, we know it's difficult. And the first one I want to focus on is having a really clear purpose. Now, quite often when looking at teacher development, professional learning, all range of different activities and focuses are kind of grouped together as, and there's lots of different names. It might be PD, professional development, professional learning, teacher development, whatever you call it. Quite often it's all lumped together as one, oh yeah, on a Wednesday, that's what we go and do. But actually it's really important to consider the different levels of impact that you're looking to have. And these are 4 levels of impact that David and I have written about in the book. And the first one is awareness. So today, just one thing that somebody might say can increase your awareness of something that you perhaps weren't aware of before. And actually it's quite straightforward to grow awareness. And it's important to grow awareness. We want to be informed professionals. We want to be aware of what might be coming up on the horizon, aware of other contexts. And actually awareness is the starting point for building into deeper knowledge. But it's relatively easy to kind of build that awareness. The next kind of level of impact is procedural expertise. So carrying out a procedure or a process. And this might be something that's literally a procedure in your context, like using an assessment system or how you record things. Or it might be a really specific procedure or process in your teaching, in your practice. So literally how you first introduce and explain a tense, or how students enter the classroom. Something really specific and tangible that actually you might see somebody else try. You try out once, or you watch it being modelled, and then actually you can have a go. And if it's really specific and clear, you might need to try it a couple of times to get it right, but relatively quickly it will become part of your practice. Whereas the next 2 levels, deliberative and adaptive, are much more complicated. And the key difference between these 2 is the time available. So deliberative expertise is the really kind of complicated knowledge that you'll have to design a curriculum, or plan a sequence or program of lessons. Actually, there's a lot of things to consider. What are the misconceptions? What prior knowledge do they have? What does the pedagogy say? What does my subject expertise tell me? But deliberative expertise, you've got time to reflect and consider. You've got time to look something up, time to talk to a colleague, and time to kind of work that through. Whereas adaptive expertise is really automatic and there's no time. It needs to be adapted, flexible, and automatic. And that's what you need to use in the classroom all the time. You're thinking about how you're explaining something, you're assessing how well it's being received, you're also conscious that there's a distraction going on over here. There's lots and lots of different things going on, and you're adapting and managing and being flexible quite automatically. And not all, but a lot of the time, professional learning is focused on this adaptive level. And actually, that takes the most intensity and the most extensive professional learning to change that. And if it's really entrenched, if we've kind of got into the habit of doing practice a certain way, changing that does take time and takes a lot of energy and conscious effort, because all those biases are kind of working against us. So when thinking about planning for professional learning, if you're planning the professional learning, you need to be really kind of deliberate about what level of impact am I looking for here? And if it's a really deep adaptive impact or complicated deliberative impact, you're going to need more time available and more multiple opportunities for people to have some input, to try it out and make it part of their day-to-day. And similarly, teachers themselves need to be really conscious. Is this something that's complicated, that I need to spend lots of time developing? Because actually we've all gone to that thing where we go to a conference, we hear a great idea, we have the best intentions that we want to run with it, and then it kind of sits in the box of guilt. And we know that we need to spend that time taking that forward. This is something that's important, that's complicated. I want to spend the time making it part of my day-to-day practice. And what this shows us is the more established our thinking is, and the more established our practice is, the more difficult it becomes. So if you're completely new to something and have you're a complete novice, you have no preconceptions, raising your awareness is quite quick. If you've already got an opinion, raising your awareness and potentially changing your mind is going to take longer. Not as long as it's going to take to change your adaptive knowledge that's very established. But essentially, the level of impact that you're looking for and the level of pre-existing knowledge that's there, this bottom right corner is the most kind of complicated and therefore the most intensive amount of time needs to be spent. But if we're conscious and we're aware of that and we plan accordingly, that's how we address those challenges and overcome those biases. So as well as having a clear purpose, considering the kind of planning and structure of a professional learning experience. And it's important to distinguish between programs and activities. So quite often when talking about what's your best professional learning experience, people might think of one activity that was either really enjoyable or was really specific and helpful or changed their minds about something. But actually, when planning professional learning, we need to think about what is the whole program, and then what are the activities that feed into that. And if we have a program where we're focused on some really quite complicated adaptive skills, then a lot of the program needs to be focused on that. And just like you design a curriculum, there needs to be a chance for different input, for trying things out, for coming back and collaborating and sharing your experiences, and then having another go and refining it. And the activities will be within that. And if there are some things like awareness raising where one activity might be sufficient, but really considering what are the programs, what's the whole program of learning, and then what are the activities within that is important. And these are a few things to consider around planning and structuring professional learning. So one, only a few programs of learning. If you're focused on complicated adaptive skills, then we all need time to undo some of our quite established habits and practices. and then make it part of our day-to-day, embed it, refine it, and make it part of our practice. And we can only do that with a few things at once. And quite often a program of professional learning might include lots of fantastic evidence-informed ideas, but actually if they all sit in the box of guilt, then it's not as useful as it could be. Providing time and space, a very practical element, but ensuring that actually that organisational support is there for teachers to collaborate, to review and share and take those ideas forward. Teacher experience and teacher stability are important when looking over a kind of structuring professional learning. Actually, where teachers are able to collaborate with more experienced teachers, actually both teachers are more likely to develop. And where people are able to stay focused on a similar subject or similar stage, age and stage for some time, they develop more and more expertise in that. So actually considering how much people are moving around and how much time they have to really develop that expertise in a particular age range or a particular focus. And then planning for the depth of impact and considering that. So the third area I wanted to share and talk about is around expertise. Now, we've all got those entrenched or natural biases which encourage us to stick to what we know and kind of reject anything new. And we do need expert input to help disrupt some of that kind of more entrenched practice, perhaps. And we need expertise because we want things that are well informed and likely to work, but actually we also need to make sure that we're challenging our thinking and having a culture where people are open to learning something that's new. So when considering choosing and commissioning expertise for professional learning, here are some things to think about. So first of all is relevance. Expertise can be really helpful for helping you unpick and get insights into your students' needs, into your practice, where might you focus your professional learning. Expertise is really important for kind of providing content and ideas of how you might approach a challenge, and that's probably the most common use for expertise. But also expertise can really help you kind of evaluate that and consider and refine it and make it part of your day-to-day and help you identify perhaps what the next thing you might focus on is. So thinking about relevance, not just in is this relevant to our context, but actually where does this fit in? Are we really clear on what we want to focus on and therefore we're looking for a solution that's well matched to that? Or actually is this expertise to help us draw out what we might want to focus on? And then thinking about evidence and evidence of impact, then there's two areas to this. We want to focus on things that are likely to work, so we want to focus on well-evidenced approaches. But when engaging with expert professional learning, we also want to focus on things that are designed in a way that are likely to work. So yes, the content might be amazing, but if we can't hear it, and we've only got half an hour on it, and then we're left on our own, then it probably won't go anywhere. So actually, if we're looking for a significant depth of impact, making sure that the programme of learning is planned around that. And that's really what ties into the sustainable element. Actually, you can invest a lot in getting expert input, but if it sits in the box of guilt, then it's not a good use, either of value for money, and it's not sustainable. So considering those two things hand in hand. And the final point I want to talk about is the kind of culture of professional learning. Now, looking at the culture of teams or institutions and schools, and probably everybody will have a different version of what makes a more negative culture. But I'm not going to try and list all the things that could make a good culture, because I think there's many different ways that could happen. And I think if you tried to list them, it would look different in different contexts. But I do think there are some kind of key elements which are part of that. And this research carried out by Craft and Pathé in the States was looking at years of teacher experience compared to teacher impact on student outcomes. And brand new teachers, almost regardless of the environment that they're in, will improve quite quickly. But as you can see, after about 3 years in a low quality teacher environment, teachers their sort of impact will plateau. Whereas what we're really interested in is what is that high quality teacher environment where actually there's ongoing development and they are having a good impact on their students, and that impact is increasing year on year. And these are the 6 elements that they picked out, and I'm going to focus on the red ones because I think they're particularly relevant to culture. But I'm just going to give you a moment to read through those. What's really interesting is this last few words in that about solving the problems in the school, and all of these, solving problems in schools, addressing teachers' concern, commitment to student achievement. There's a real focus on what is the student need, or what is the opportunity we want to build on, what's happening in the classroom, and that's the real focus. So I think the first point about culture is that it's really driven by the students and what's happening in the classroom. Principal leadership, professional development, providing time and resource for sufficient follow-up. And that's what I hope I've touched on today around actually if you're looking for a really complicated impact, you need to have a sort of intensive and extensive input. And then mutual trust, respect, openness, and a commitment to student achievement. Now, how do people trust one another? How people are open with one another? I think there are lots of different ways. What somebody views as respect, other people might view differently. But I think these are some things to consider as parts of that, and there will be many others alongside it. The first is how we talk about and communicate professional learning. So professional learning is not because there's necessarily a problem to fix. It's not because you're not good enough. It's because you could be even better. Even the most excellent teacher will still have new evidence will come to light, the student body will change. The ongoing focus and development is not because they need to improve, it's because they can improve. And actually it's part of being an engaged professional. So when thinking about how we strengthen and develop our teacher teams, thinking about how we describe that, it's not because we're not good enough, it's because we can be even better and because it's empowering. In the book, we talk about this thing called the organisational edge, and obviously we're focused particularly on schools, but I think it will apply in your context as well, where if this is the circle is your institution, and what on the outside is the people that you are looking to serve. So there's the community, the students, their families. And what's on the inside is the processes, the systems, any external pressures or sector context. What really matters is what happens on the edge of the circle. What happens in the classroom? How do people interact with students in the corridors? Those are the bits that make a difference to the community, the students and the families. Those are the really important bits. And what happens in the middle needs to be driven by the organisational edge, needs to be driven by the edge of the circle. Too often we start with a process or a system and then it's rolled out and we assume it's going to benefit what's happening on the edge. Quite often we hear a great idea that might be a great idea, but is it really what is happening on the organisational edge? Is it really focused on what we need? Or is it just a great idea that actually is probably not our most important area at the moment? And that ties back to that focusing on a commitment to student achievement, really being driven by what's happening on the organisational edge. Being evidence-informed, yes, you want to be evidence-informed because it's more likely that you'll have an impact on your students, but also I think it's an important part of a developmental and positive culture. Actually, to be evidence-informed, you have to show that you're open to challenge, that you might change your mind, that you're considered and transparent around professional learning. Modelling professional learning. So those of you who are leaders of your institutions, actually, you prioritise your professional learning too. You take part in it. And then finally, prioritising and resourcing it. If you provide time and money and space for people to invest in their professional learning, that ties into the culture that other people will do the same. And we recognise that building a culture of professional learning, if people are, biases are working against us, if people are resistant to learning something new, it does take time to build up to a culture of professional learning. And in the book, we kind of talk about the building blocks of how you move towards that. So if you're in a kind of poor culture where people are maybe fearful of trying out something new, fearful of observing one another, then these are some things that you might want to think about. Just, are people sharing practice? Are people just talking about their practice and their teaching? Is trying out something new celebrated? Are people beginning to let's talk about the evidence behind why we do something. Have an open door week where, come and look at my classroom. I'm trying out something that's a bit new. Come and have a look and tell me what you think. But those things on their own are great, but on their own they won't actually have an impact as much as they could do. So I could share an idea and it feels good, but actually for somebody else to make the time to take it forward into their practice takes another step. So if we're moving into a sort of halfway house, where you might have these things in place, but actually you want to push it a bit further, then when sharing practice, are we reflecting on the impact? So I tried out this thing, and what I saw was an increase in the use of complicated vocabulary. Or I was trying out this thing to really explore how people were using complicated tenses, I'm not sure. And now have a look at their work and see how much it's made a difference. It's really worked for this student, but maybe not this student. And collaboration is actually really focused on what are the needs that our students have. And colleagues are beginning to feel, oh yeah, my professional learning is really driven by the challenges I face in my classroom and that my students might have. And then from that, you build towards what I'm sure you were talking about yesterday around kind of evaluative experimentation, where colleagues are collaborating together to focus on pupil needs and experiment and refine their practice to meet those needs. And actually the discussion around evidence, it encourages kind of constructive criticism and an open discussion about, actually, does this reflect our context? Is this something we can take forward? And that actually we're moving from just talking about evidence-informed practice to really thinking about how do we make it part of our day-to-day, because we know that we can hear a great idea and then still not have the time and energy to remember to take it forward into our practice. So I guess I started with professional learning is hard and learning something new is hard. So we need to think quite carefully about what's the impact that we're looking for and be quite explicit and clear about the impact that we're looking for and planning accordingly. And making sure that you're considering programs of learning rather than individual activities. Thinking about where your expert input might feed in and how you're deciding what that expert input is. And then finally, it is all underpinned by the culture around that. And actually, it's important to consider where is the culture now compared to where I might want it to be, and how are we kind of taking steps to build towards that. So, thank you very much.